The next things that we looked at were theories of motivation, okay? And theories of motivations come in two broad flavors, okay? The first flavor of workplace motivation is called the needs theories of motivation, okay? It's a grouping of theories of motivation that explain why people do what they do or why they're motivated to do what they do based on a specific need that people have to do things or to want to be recognized for things, okay? So it's very much focused on our internal need. We have a need to do something. So needs theories are really concerned with what motivates our workers. What is it internally that motivates them and makes them do the things they do, the desire? And one of the very fundamental needs theories that works on this idea of what is it internally that's driving the motivation that I have is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is the I'll call it the granddaddy of theories of motivation. It is a needs theory that focuses on this needs thing. And what Abraham Maslow said when he developed this is he came up with a basic pyramid, I'll call it a pyramid, which is a ladder of things that we need taken care of in order to be motivated to do the next thing that's up the ladder, okay? So Maslow's hierarchy broke the world or people's motivational world into 5 distinct levels. The first level was something called physiological needs. Physiological needs are the needs that we have to survive. It's our survival needs, okay? Our survival needs. It's being in the pond and looking to figure out how we're going to save ourselves, okay? And survival items include things like air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. Sex comes in there. It's our fundamental needs of existence. Without those things, we will not survive, okay? Maslow said that in order to motivate someone at all, they have to have those basic needs met. If they don't have those very basic needs met, it is pointless to try to get them to do anything but worry about those needs. And then he said, look, once those basic needs of physiological needs are met, then there's another order of needs that need to be met. The next order of needs is our safety. We need our safety met. So we need personal security, employment, resources, health, property. Those are important to us. And unless we have those, we're going to be so focused on getting those that we're not interested in anything else. So the higher level ones won't motivate us until we get the current one taken care of. So we need our basic safety needs taken care of. Once our basic safety needs are taken care of, then we'll move on to our next level of needs that will motivate us. And our next level of needs is our social needs, our love and belonging needs, for friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection, and so on. And these social needs, according to Maslow, need to be met. And when they are met, then we can move on to the next thing that will motivate us, okay? So if we don't have our social needs taken care of, it's useless to talk about our esteem needs. Our esteem needs are respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom. So effectively, these esteem needs are the ones that we look at to make us different or better than everyone else. So everyone, in relation to everyone else, how do we feel? That's esteem. Esteem is how we feel relative to the group. We have to have the group, that love and belonging, in order to have some comparison. And once we have our esteem needs met, then we move on to this final top level need of self-actualization, which is being at peace with everything we have. So really, we have no needs whatsoever because everything is taken care of. And really, at that point in time, will anything motivate us? And the point that Maslow is making, no, if we're totally satisfied in terms of having everything, nothing is going to motivate us to do anything. So, and that's a bad place to be because nothing is motivating us. So we need we always strive to move up the ladder of needs. At the top, though, once we're there, we've achieved everything. Okay, so Maslow's theory, as I say, is like a granddaddy. It is the one that sits and says, this is the basic level of motivation. And people looked at that and people said, well, okay, yeah, that's very good, Maslow. We like that. That's good. But this idea of necessarily having to have a base level need met before we move to a next level need, is that necessarily true? You know, is there cases, for example, when we don't have our safety needs met, but we still need love and belonging? And this guy, Adolfler, this researcher said, you know, I like what Maslow has said, but I think it's a little more complicated than that. And what he did was he came up with his own theory. Whoops, just let me get down here. His own theory called the ERG theory, which ERG stands for existence, relatedness, and growth. ERG sounds so technical, but it is a rework of Maslow's theory, okay? So ERG is just a rework of the Maslow theory. And here's basically what it is. The triangle that you see there, the triangle is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Adolfler kind of made it a little bit simpler. He said, I'm going to take Maslow's hierarchy and I'm going to split it into three. I'm going to group together the first two, the second two, and the last one, the top one, I'll leave it by itself. The first two, the safety and physiological needs, he called that existence needs. In his theory, he talked about that as being existence, and that is, you know, these physiological needs, these safety needs, all coupled together into one group. He also looked at social needs and esteem needs and said that's really one group. I'm going to lump them together. I'm going to call them relatedness needs. Okay, relatedness. And self-actualization, that's fine. Well, you know, but this idea of someone reaching self-actualization is a little bit challenging. So let's say that we're always looking to improve ourselves. Let's call it growth needs. So he basically broke Maslow's hierarchy or you know, lumped things together to create this three-level theory that really wasn't a level of all. And that's one of the things he stressed. He said, look, Maslow said that you had to have one before you got the other, and you had to have, you know, those needs met before you moved on. He said, I don't think that's the case. He said, we have existence needs, we have relatedness needs, and we have growth needs. We can jump back and forth between those. We can have one without the other, or we can have couple without the third, and so on. So he basically said, all of these needs are important. They're all very relevant. I agree with you, Maslow, but this idea of having to have one met before you went on to the next, I disagree with you on that. So the ERG theory was really kind of a more modern take on Maslow. So let me just go to this little video here now, which explains it.
Hello, and welcome to today's lesson, where we're looking at the ERG theory of motivation. Now, the model was developed by an American psychologist called Clayton Paul Alderfer, and you can think of ERG theory as being a simplified version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in fact, the best way to visualize ERG theory is by putting it in the context of the hierarchy of needs, as you can see here. Now, ERG stands for existence, relatedness, and growth. And these are the three basic needs that employees will try to satisfy. Now, in the model, as one need is filled, this will provide the motivation for the employee to want to fulfill another need. Now, all three needs must be satisfied simultaneously in order for an individual to feel motivated. So let's examine each of these terms, existence, relatedness, and growth, in turn. So first we have existence, and existence refers to our basic survival needs as humans. So in this category are food and water, shelter, good health, and feeling safe. And these needs can be broadly described as our basic psychological and safety needs. Now, if you can't satisfy your basic survival needs, then it's impossible to focus on other higher needs. So for example, if you don't have enough water to drink, and if you don't have ready access to clean water, then your life is in immediate peril, and finding water will occupy most, if not all, of your thoughts at the expense of almost all other needs. Now, next we have relatedness, and relatedness refers to our need to relate to other people. So that is, it refers to the relationships we have Now, having good relationships and interactions with other humans is a need we all share, although obviously this need isn't quite as strong as our basic survival needs. Now, to feel happy and content, most humans need to interact with others, and they need those interactions to be positive in nature. Now, finally, we have growth. Growth refers to our need for personal development, to be creative and to perform meaningful work. Now, growth allows us to explore what our potential might be within our current environment. So it's easy to see why you might lack motivation if you're stuck doing the exact same job every day without variety. And on the flip side, if your job provides interesting and varied challenges, it's easier to be motivated as you're being presented with growth opportunities daily. Now, an important principle to be aware of in ERG theory is this idea called the frustration regression principle, which basically says that if a higher level need fails to be filled, then a person may regress and seek to fulfill further lower level needs instead. Now, for example, if an ambitious employee isn't provided with growth opportunities, then their motivation will be lower and they may become frustrated. And in turn, this may cause them to seek out more relatedness needs. So for example, they may start socializing with the members of the team more frequently. And finally, if they're unable to satisfy those relatedness needs, they'll regress again and they may further satisfy their existence needs. So there are several differences between ERG theory of motivation and Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you should be aware of. So firstly, unlike in Maslow's theory, needs at multiple levels can be pursued at the same time. And also in ERG theory, if a higher level need isn't satisfied, then the person may regress to seeking to satisfy lower level needs. So that's the frustration regression principle we just covered. And finally, in Maslow's theory, needs must be satisfied in sequence, starting from the bottom of the pyramid and working their way to the top, one at a time. And that's not the case with ERG theory, where different levels of needs can be satisfied at any time. So for example, an individual can feel that they are having their growth needs met while still feeling unsatisfied in their relationships. So how do you use the theory? Well, to boost motivation, managers should look to promote all the elements of ERG theory simultaneously. So according to the theory, if you limit your focus to just one or two aspects of the theory, then you'll fail to motivate your team effectively. So the aim really in using the theory is to take action before frustration regression starts to set in. So first, let's look at existence. Now, employees won't be happy, obviously, if their basic needs are not met. And remember that safety is one of these basic human needs. So if employees don't feel safe in their work environment, then they're very unlikely to be motivated. So one question you can ask yourself is, are you doing everything you can to make your employees feel safe? Next, we have relatedness. And we all want good relationships as humans. If we don't get on with our boss, for example, it's going to be difficult to feel motivated. Likewise, if we have negative relationships with co-workers, then our motivation will probably be low. So we look forward to leaving the office each day so we can get back to our homes and switch to having more positive relationships with our families. So one question as a manager you should be asking around relatedness is, are any of my team working alone all day? Another question you might consider is, are there good interactions between all the team members, and what can I do to facilitate better interactions? Finally, we have growth. So in the workplace, we have a need to grow. If we work hard year after year and everything stays exactly the same, we're going to find it really hard to stay motivated for the long term. We need growth. Now, that could mean recognition of our achievements. It could mean respect from our peers, pay rises, increases in responsibility, etc., etc. And some questions you can ask yourself as a manager are, do any of your team feel they're stuck in a dead-end job? Is each member of your team aware of the growth opportunities available to them And finally, do you tend to hire internal or external candidates for new positions? And by preferring internal candidates, that can provide more growth opportunities for your existing team. So, in summary, the ERG theory of motivation is a simplified but more flexible version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it proposes 3 needs that must all be satisfied in order for an individual to feel motivated, and that's existence, relatedness, and growth. And finally, managers can use the theory to ensure that the conditions within their organization are right to allow each team member to be as motivated as they can. So that's it for today's lesson. Really hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
So that was a good summary of what you need to worry about with regards to ERG theory. ERG theory, as I said, today is Groundhog Day. And one of the things that we think about with ERG theory is as we move into this pandemic, and this is some of the concerns that we have because we are living in this pandemic, do you think that everybody is copacetic with their, are we meeting our needs in terms of ERG? I'm just going back here now. In terms of existence needs, do people feel safe? That's a challenge in our environment right now, particularly with this stream of COVID rolling through. So that's seriously affecting people's level of motivation. In terms of relatedness needs, if everybody's isolated or isolating, particularly from work, that's affecting people's relatedness needs. And in terms of this whole idea of growth and the like, again, very important, are there opportunities being opened up to people if the economy is slowed down because of this? So I would suggest to you that if we employ this ERG theory to our current time, this is pointing to having some serious implications for business in terms of being able to motivate people, particularly if they're not as well connected, or if they don't see any growth opportunities, or if they're concerned about their own health and safety. So as was just laid out in the video there, ERG theory is just a kind of a simplified version of Maslow's. The point of it is exactly the same, though, is that we have to concern ourselves with individual needs and be able to meet those needs in order to ensure that people are motivated to do the jobs that they're asked to do. So looking at needs series, those are the 2 major ones, and those are the only 2 ones that we're going to focus on here. There are more, so I don't want you to think that this is the only 2 needs series. But these 2 are the ones that are often held up to say, these are the classic examples. What comes of this? And so what comes of this? So what? You say, what difference does it make? Well, they're important for managers to recognize, because the fact of the matter is, having studied these, we should come back and say, yep, we have to consider the individual. We have to consider the individual whenever we're thinking about motivation. Everybody has unique needs. Everybody's situation is different, where they fit along Maslow's or the ERG theory, where they fit in terms of having their needs met might be different. We have to recognize where people are, recognize that these basic needs need to be covered off in order to get people to be fully engaged in the work opportunity. We also talk about the need for intrinsic motivation here. We've seen that in the needs theory, most of the stuff that we're talking about is internally driven. These needs are internal needs. We have to recognize the importance for providing opportunities for intrinsic motivation, making people feel good about their jobs, essentially. And so we've got to think about those couple of things in every individual that we work with whenever we employ the concepts of motivation. Okay, any questions on that? Well, those two are our first needs theory, but we also have something called process theories, and I kind of like process theories to explain why behaviors happen. Okay, needs theories are there really to predict how things would happen. These process theories are really explainers for why they happened. Okay, so we need to consider that a process theory focuses on the mechanism by which we choose a target in order to exercise that persistent effort towards. Okay, so we got to be able to think about how do we encourage people to move this forward, and if we recognize the basic concepts of process theory, we can think about how can we, as managers, best ensure, realizing the way people are, and the way to process information, and the way that things happen, that we can understand the things we do and the implications it can have. In this particular set, we're looking at three basic process theories here. One called expectancy, one called goal setting, and one called equity. Let's look at expectancy theory first. Expectancy theory relies on the belief that motivation is determined by the outcomes that people expect to occur as a result of their actions on the job. Okay, let's break that down. You are an employee. You think to yourself, if you do a really good job, you go to work for someone, you think to yourself, I'm going to do a really good job. I'm going to work very hard. I'm going to put in long hours. I'll do whatever you ask me to do. I'll be a model employee. In your mind, the reason that you're doing that is to A, keep your job, B, to advance in your job, and C, to ensure your long-term growth opportunities. Okay? So you want to make a career of this, and you want to make a very good first impression. Now, let's assume then that a year goes by, and your boss says to you, you're not doing a very good job here. I don't like the way you do things. How are you going to feel? You've just put a tremendous amount of effort and energy into it. You thought you were doing good. You never got any feedback along the way that said, no, things were bad. And this is hitting you like a ton of bricks. You could imagine that all the energy you put in, all the effort, and all the sense was that things are going well. And then suddenly you're told, no, things are not going very well. There's a disconnect. You're feeling this huge disconnect. That's what expectancy theory is really all about. You, as an individual, expect a certain outcome from your actions. If you do a really good job, you expect to be praised for it. You expect the opportunities that arise from it. You work hard at it. Of course, you deserve it. Okay? The moment that you don't get what you think that you are entitled to, you worked hard, you expect praise and opportunity. You don't expect someone to say, no, you're not doing a very good job. That's going to take the wind out of your sails, isn't it? You can imagine that taking all of the wind out of your sails. Expectancy theory can be applied, if managers understand and they can apply expectancy theory to their own minds. They know someone's worked really hard. They know someone's put in long hours. They know someone's done a good job. They need to recognize that. They absolutely need to recognize that, because we should know, or the manager should be aware, that the person doing that good job expects to see positive results from those efforts. The same is also true in the reverse. Let's assume you don't do a very good job. You're not interested in doing a very good job. You think to yourself, I don't really like working here. But your manager tells you, you're wonderful. you're going to feel a disconnect there, aren't you? Because you haven't worked very hard. You haven't done a very good job. Your manager says, oh, you're wonderful. You're going to feel a disconnect and somewhat strange at that even. So expectancy theory is really something that comes out of your mind and the amount of effort you put into. You expect a certain level of reward at the end. If you don't get that, there's going to be a disconnect. And if that disconnect exists, you will not be motivated. It will essentially rob you of motivation. And you can see it kind of broken down. And I should have put this slide up while I was saying that, but you can see it kind of broken down here. You know, if we think about expectancy, you're putting in a certain amount of effort that gives a certain amount of performance, and you expect a certain amount of reward. So you want those things to line up according to the, I'll call it the natural order. If you put a lot of effort in, you expect a lot of reward in return. If you don't get that, there will be a huge disconnect.
Process-based perspectives are concerned with how motivation occurs, rather than attempting to identify specific motivational stimuli such as pay or recognition. Process perspectives focus on why people choose certain behavioral options to satisfy their needs and how they evaluate their satisfaction after they've attained those goals. Let's take a look at the expectancy theory of motivation. Expectancy theory suggests that people are motivated by how much they want something and the likelihood they perceive of getting it. Expectancy theory is a more encompassing model of motivation than equity theory. Over the years since its original formulation, the theory's scope and complexity have continued to grow. Victor Vroom is generally credited with first applying the theory of motivation to the workplace. The theory attempts to determine how individuals choose among alternative behaviors. The basic premise of expectancy theory is that motivation depends on how much we want something and how likely we are to get it. This figure summarizes the basic expectancy model. The model's general components are effort, the result of motivated behavior, performance, and outcomes. Expectancy theory emphasizes the linkages among these elements, which are described in terms of expectancies, instrumentalities, and balances. Effort to performance expectancy is a person's perception of the probability that effort will lead to successful performance. Performance to outcome instrumentality is a person's perception of the probability that performance will lead to certain other outcomes. An outcome is anything that might potentially result from performance. High performance conceivably might produce such outcomes as a pay raise, a promotion, recognition from the boss, fatigue, stress, less time to rest, among others. The valence of the outcome is the relative attractiveness or unattractiveness, the value of the outcome to the person. Pay raises, promotions, and recognition might all have positive valences, whereas fatigue, stress, and less time and rest might have negative valence. The strength of outcome valences varies from person to person. Work-related stress may be a significant negative factor for one person, but only a slight annoyance to another. The basic expectancy framework suggests that three conditions must be met before motivated behavior occurs. First, the effort to performance expectancy must be well above zero. That is, the worker must reasonably expect that exerting effort will produce high levels of performance. Second, the performance to outcome instrumentalities must be well above zero. In other words, the person must believe that performance will realistically result in valued outcomes. Third, the sum of all the valences for the potential outcomes relevant to the person must be positive. One or more valences may be negative as long as the positives outweigh the negatives. Expectancy theory is so complicated that researchers have found it to be quite difficult to test. In particular, the measures of various paths of the model may lack validity, and the procedures for investigating relationships among the variables have been less scientific than researchers would like. Moreover, people are seldom as rational and objective in choosing behaviors as expectancy theory implies. Still, the logic of the model, combined with the consistent, albeit modest, research support for it, suggests that the theory has much to offer. Because expectancy theory is so complex, it's difficult to apply directly in the workplace. A manager would need to figure out what the rewards each employee wants and how valuable those rewards are to each person, measure the various expectancies, and finally adjust the relationships to create motivation.
That's expectancy theory. That little video helped explain it even more. So effectively, the bottom line is you have to meet your expectations. So what your managers do, reinforce these expectancies. If people expect it and they are clear in terms of what the rules are, if you work really hard, you will get a benefit. If managers can make that clear to employees, then that will help motivate people. That's the bottom line of this. You need for managers to clearly outline what are the goalposts in terms of what do you need to do in order to be successful in this organization? What are the consequences if you don't do things? And that way, people will have a clear understanding and there will be no doubts. And as I say, they clarify the reward contingencies. And again, this diversity issue rolls in as well. Okay, that's one of the process theories. The next process theory is similar, and it's called goal setting theory. And what goal setting theory does effectively says, okay, let's set some goals here. And if we can set clear goals that people can meet and clear paths to how to achieve those goals, and we can communicate them, which is the critical thing, communicate them to the employees, then that will be a good motivator. So some of the key things: goal specificity, specific goals, specific and exact level of achievement for people to accomplish. What are the bars? What do we need to do? What are we shooting for? Goal challenge, make sure that they're attainable yet significant. Goal commitment encourages people to focus on those goals. So, and what can we do to prove that we're committed to these goals? And constantly seeking goal feedback. You know, that's basically giving you an update. You're an employee, you're working really hard, you want some feedback. And I've got all of these things kind of put in this circular diagram here. You know, include employees in goal setting, goals set for given work units, specific goals, ask supervisors to set their goals, hold performance meetings, ongoing feedback, ensure focus on relevant areas, and align reward system with results. These are all simple things when you think about it that managers can do. So goal setting theory, if we set clear goals, we set the goalposts, we clearly identify the employees, this type of theory suggests this will help you make sure your employees are motivated to do the job. Let's just look at this.
Hello and welcome to today's lesson where we're looking at Locke's goal setting theory of motivation. Now, this theory is a great framework to use when setting goals for yourself or for your team. The theory is based on research showing that with the right goals you can increase both productivity and motivation. Now, Locke and Latham, the two guys who developed the theory, were able to demonstrate that when you set specific and challenging goals and you receive regular feedback on your progress, then your productivity and your motivation will increase. Now, this applies whether your job is highly complex or low in complexity. So whatever your job right now or whatever your team do, then this theory can help improve productivity and motivation. Now, as well as showing the types of goals that can increase motivation, their research also showed how not to set goals. They found that setting unspecific or vague goals failed to increase motivation. Now, that might seem really obvious to you that setting vague goals like this won't increase motivation or performance. But the thing to understand here is that the first person to realize and prove this was Locke. So why does goal setting increase productivity? Well, there's many reasons. So number one, goals keep you focused on what's important. So when you get sidetracked, you quickly realize that the distraction isn't moving you towards your goals. Two, goals make you more persistent. Now, it's natural to have days where you're super motivated and other days where things aren't going so well. So having goals that you're committed to can give you the determination to push through the difficult times. And thirdly, goals help you rise to the challenge. If you're committed to achieving them, then stretch goals can help you to achieve more than you really ever thought possible. So according to goal setting theory, to be motivating and increase productivity, goals need to have the following 5 characteristics: clarity, challenge, commitment, feedback, and task complexity. Now let's examine each of these in turn. Firstly, clarity. To be motivating, goals need to be clear. When a goal is clear, it's easy to understand exactly what you need to achieve. It's not open to debate or interpretation. Now, conversely, when a goal is vague and imprecise, it's difficult to know if you've ever achieved it. So which do you think is a better goal? Increase customer satisfaction by 15%, or do your best to increase customer satisfaction? It's the first one, increase satisfaction by 15%, because it's more precise. Now, there are a number of steps you can use to help you set clear goals. And the first is to use SMART goals. And SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And there are many videos on YouTube or articles on the internet you can Google to find out more about SMART goals. The second thing you can do is you can ensure you understand exactly how you know that you will have achieved your goal. And the final thing you can do is you can ensure you have a metric you can use to track your progress towards your goal. Now, the second factor is challenge, and to be motivating, goals need to be challenging, but not too challenging. Now, a goal that's too easy to achieve won't motivate you. It won't cause you to up your game and increase your performance. And similarly, a goal that you perceive as way beyond your current capability won't motivate you either. It might actually demotivate you. Now, for a goal to motivate, it must hit the sweet spot between challenging you but not over challenging you, is what we're trying to say. So for example, too easy might be increase customer conversion rate from the present benchmark, but too challenging might be increase customer conversion rate by 700%, but just right might just be increase the customer conversion rate by 10%. So how do we set challenging goals? Well, firstly, ask yourself honestly if your goal is too easy, too challenging, or just right. And secondly, think about what scenarios might arise to slow down your progress towards your goal. Plan ahead. So you could perform some scenario planning to determine how you're going to push through these challenges if they arise. Now, 3, we have commitment. For a goal to be motivating, you must be committed to it. Likewise, if you're setting goals for others, you need to ensure that they are bought into those goals. So as an example of no commitment, you simply decide in a meeting with your boss what your team's targets will be, and then dictate those to your team. Your team are not going to be committed in that example. As an example of commitment, you work with your team to determine together what the targets should be and how you can hit them. If you do that, you'll get the buy-in of your team. So how do you gain commitment? Well, 1, agree that targets are realistic and sensible with each member of your team, and ask them explicitly if they buy into each goal. Now, if any rewards are associated with hitting targets, ensure that they are wanted, desirable, and the process of deciding who gets what is transparent. And finally, keep yourself on track by visualizing what it will mean to you to hit your targets. How will your life be different if you hit the targets? How might your career be different if you hit your targets? Number 4, we have feedback. In order for a goal to continue to motivate you as you work towards it, you must receive feedback. Now, for feedback to be effective, there must be a goal. Feedback must be received regularly, and both positive and negative feedback should be welcomed. Now, it's worth knowing that if you're giving someone negative feedback, then make sure you do so in a constructive way. So, an example of good feedback is you set your team members some goals and you organize a weekly check-in to monitor their progress. A bad way to give feedback would be to set the team members goals and then forget all about it until their end of year performance review, whenever that is. So how should you give and receive feedback? Well, one way is to schedule a weekly check-in to monitor progress. You could use an app such as Strides or a spreadsheet to track progress. Or you can follow, there's a link below this video that you can follow, which leads to an article which will teach you all about how to give and receive effective feedback. So finally, we come to task complexity. Now, in order for a goal to be motivating, it must not be too complex or too complicated. Highly complicated goals can be overwhelming and even demotivating. So for example, good target setting might be break down complex targets into sub-targets so they're easy to understand, but a bad way of doing things is to simply set a complicated target and expect your team member to just get on with it. So how should you handle complex goals? Well, obviously break them down into sub-targets. And secondly, be aware that if your team member feels overwhelmed by a target, it might just be too complex. And if that's the case, consider reassessing the target and trying to break it down. So in summary, the key takeaway from the work of Locke in his goal setting theory is that goal setting, when done correctly, can be a powerful tool for boosting motivation and productivity. And that applies both when you're setting personal goals for yourself and when you're setting goals for your team. Now, Locke identified 5 principles to follow when goal setting, and these are that goals should be clear, challenging but not too challenging, explicitly committed to, involve regular feedback, and as uncomplicated as possible. Now, by using Locke's goal setting theory, you can keep your team and yourself motivated and productive. So that's it for this lesson. Hello and welcome to today's lesson.
Okay, so that was a good summary too of enhancing goal commitment. That goal setting theory has a lot of the similar elements of when we looked at the other theories related to anything to do with motivation. Some of the common themes are there. So any questions on that? Okay. Well, the final third version of motivating theory in terms of a process theory is something called equity theory. Now, this is I'm going to say my favorite one, because what equity theory is all about is equality. Okay, this equity being that magic equal sign. So equity theory is a process theory that states that motivation stems from a comparison. Okay, what are you equal to? So a comparison of the inputs you put into something in your job and the outputs that you receive. So you can think of it as input equal output. You're always comparing how much you put into something versus what you get out of something, okay? We also compare what you put into something relative to what others put into it. Okay, so you're comparing the direct reward, what you put in and what you get out. But you're also comparing what other people put in and what other people get out. So according to the theory, individuals are motivated to maintain an equitable relationship. Inequity is unpleasant and tension-producing, and people will devote considerable energy to reducing the inequity. So let's say, for example, you put a tremendous amount of work into your job, and you get a tremendous amount of reward from it. That's good. That's an equal relationship, okay? But let's assume that you put a tremendous amount of work into your job, and you don't get anything out of it. Then you got an unequal situation. And it's not something that you're going to sustain. The moment that you see an inequity between the amount of effort you put in and the reward that you get out of it, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to reduce the amount of effort you put in, or you're going to seek to increase additional reward. Okay? So you're going to try to keep that equity balance going. So individuals that perceive inequity might use a number of tactics to regain equity. So we could think of perceptually distort one's own inputs or outputs. I really guess I didn't put that much effort into it. Perceptually distort the inputs of or outcomes of comparison. Well, I guess that those people there do more work than I do or do less work than I do. choose another comparison person or group. So basically, you're looking at someone else or a different, the guy that works with me, he's a slacker. I'm going to look at this guy over here as a comparison to the amount of effort I put in. Alter one's outcomes. Stop doing it. You do less. Or leave the exchange relationship, which means quit by any other name. So equity theory says that we're always doing this assessment in our minds. How much do we put in and how much do we get out? And is that relationship what you would consider, and everyone has a different valuation of what they consider, but is it what you consider to be fair? Is it equal? Is it, I'm putting a lot in, I'm getting a lot out. I'm putting a lot in, they're putting a lot in. I'm putting nothing in, they're putting nothing in. You know, do you have this equity in your situation? And the task for managers to make sure from a management point of view that people perceive equity in the relationship. If they do a lot of work, they get a lot of reward for it. So you can think of it like this balance, the inputs versus outputs, okay? How much do you put in? How much do you get out? Is it balancing? And if it's not balancing, people are going to become demotivated. So you need to make sure that that is constantly being ensured.
Hello and welcome to today's lesson where we're looking at the equity theory of motivation. Everyone in the workplace is motivated by something. Now this motivation could be external, such as money or status, or it could be internal, such as a desire to do a good job. Leaders and managers have sought to understand theories of motivation and then test them in the workplace to increase the productivity and the effectiveness of their workforce. Now, Adams' equity theory, which is also known as the equity theory of motivation, was developed in 1963 by John Stacey Adams, a workplace behavioral psychologist. Equity theory is based on the idea that individuals are motivated by fairness. In simple terms, equity theory states that if an individual identifies an inequity between themselves and one of their peers, then they will adjust the work they do to make the situation fair in their eyes. Now, as an example, if an employee learns that a peer doing basically the same job as them is earning more money, then they're going to choose to do less work, thus creating fairness in their eyes. Now, extrapolating from this, Adams' equity theory tells us that the higher an individual's perception of equity, in other words, fairness, the higher their perception of fairness, then the more motivated they will be. So conversely, an individual will be demotivated if they perceive unfairness. To understand Adams' equity theory in full, we need to first define inputs and outputs. Now, inputs are defined as those things that an individual does in order to receive an output. They're basically the contribution an individual makes to the organization. So common inputs might be number of hours worked, the commitment shown, the experience brought to the role, personal sacrifices that are made, the loyalty the individual has demonstrated to superiors or the organization, and the flexibility shown by the individual, for example, accepting assignments at very short notice or with tight deadlines. Now, outputs are the result an individual receives as a result of their inputs. Now, some of these are going to be tangible, such as a salary, but others are going to be intangible, such as recognition. So some common outputs are obviously salary, bonus, pension contributions, annual holiday allowances, company cars, stock options, promotion, flexibility of work arrangements, even things like learning opportunity and the sense of achievement the employee has. So now that we understand inputs and outputs, we're in a position to define equity. Equity is defined as an individual's outputs divided by that same person's inputs. And what Adams' equity theory does is it goes a step further and states that individuals don't just understand equity in isolation, but instead they look around and they compare themselves against others. Now, if they perceive inequity, then they're going to adjust their inputs
in order to restore balance, and you can see that in the diagram here. You can visualize equity theory by thinking about a weighing scales where you have inputs on one side and outputs on the other, and an individual is always working to keep these two in balance using other people as their reference group. So essentially,